Good evening, everyone. My name is Douglas Sprang, and I lead the Energy and Environment series for the MIT Club of Northern California. I am delighted to kick off our third event of the 2022-23 season, featuring top speakers in the fields of renewable energy, climate change, drought in California, and, of course, electric vehicles. Our speaker this evening is Pat Romano, CEO of ChargePoint. His topic for this evening is EVs at a tipping point, what can go wrong? Pat will address issues that could slow down the inevitable transition to electric vehicles and the opportunities that lie behind them, with emphasis on the major issue of charging stations. We've enabled live Q&A, and I'll do my best to get some of these questions to our moderator to add to the many questions we got from online registration, but we won't be able to get to all of them due to the large audience. It's time for our program to begin. I'll be back at the end to close things out, but now I would like to introduce our moderator, Mark Platchon, a long-term contributor to our series who will orchestrate tonight's fireside chat. Mark is a highly experienced early-stage investor with specific expertise in electric vehicles. So take it away, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome this evening. I am thrilled to be here with you all. A wide range of new domestic and imported electric pickup trucks, SUVs, and cars are coming onto the market. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, sets up big tax incentives to get those cars out there and to upgrade the grid and expand the EV charger network. There's many questions about what drives consumer attitudes. Are with 300-mile range and level 3 charging, are we all set? Or can something still go wrong and slow this down in the change to save the planet? No one understands this better than Pat. Pat Romano is the CEO of ChargePoint. I've known Pat now for more than a decade and watched him build this company to the largest network of EV chargers in the country. Where he's a special guy now, especially. President Biden just appointed Pat to be on the National Infrastructure Advisory Council. And we'll ask him more about what that means, but they're worried about critical infrastructure and building it out. So Pat, turn on your screen. Let's have a fireside chat and fire this up.
So it won't let me turn on video because the host stopped it. So if the host could turn on my video, please. There you go. Technology.
There he is.
I'm worried about what could stop.
There you go.
I think we should
all it takes.
Stop this fireside chat.
So welcome, Pat. Thanks very much. For those of you that haven't met Pat, when you're in the room with him, you get this feeling that you're in with a chained cat. He's just incredibly energetic and muscular. I know he's a triathlete, and he's a blast to be around. He's also, right, you used to own a restaurant. So
2 restaurants.
Whether it's all kinds of interest. So Pat, tell us a little more about yourself and why a guy like you went to MIT.
Well, thanks for, by the way, plugging my cat, because my cat's probably sitting right out the door, heard you, and is taking all the credit, saying, yeah, I'm a good role model. But when I was a kid growing up, I think most people that go into engineering pretty much self-identify as an engineer at a very, very young age. I could actually go downstairs. My parents are visiting, and if I had my mom tell you how many times I took something apart and didn't quite put it together correctly at home just to see how it worked, it sounds cliched, but I used to do that constantly, volunteer for every possible science experiment, science fair, science competition, period, as I was growing up. And I probably had the social life to go with that. But wound up not going to MIT as an undergrad. I went to Harvard as an undergrad. Did my degrees in computer science. I kind of fell in love with believe me, this is going to really date me, the TRS-80s that my high school bought for a programming class that I took kind of later in my high school career. And I got the bug, and no pun intended, and wound up majoring in computer science at Harvard, a good program. And then got very interested in image processing, computer graphics, things like that were kind of coming up then. The compute capability was just, supercomputers were just at the edge of being able to handle those things. So went to the MIT Media Lab and worked in a group that was working in conjunction with the Advanced TV Research Program over, I think it was Core 6 over at MIT, doing some of the first work on compressing video and making it fit on audio CDs at audio CD bit rates, which was about a megabit per second. So you can imagine back then, kind of that was a much harder problem. You could do that on your laptop right now, but back then that wasn't in the cards, and so we were doing all the research to try to figure that out, and have since stayed been an engineer my whole life, and begrudgingly in my 33-year career, about half of it has not been running engineering. The last half I've been actually a CEO in my last two companies, this one and the one prior, and I still harass my engineering team as often as I can because I enjoy it a lot. But anyway, enough about me.
So I mentioned this President's Commission thing. Can you tell us more about what that gets you to do and what change? How's it going to save us?
Well, first of all, we don't get paid for it. And I don't know if it can directly save you, but so way back, I believe it was in the time of Prohibition, thereabouts, there were some rules put in place for how the government could avail itself of private industry in a way that would be public, structured, and hopefully devoid of what the original fear was, which is effectively embedding one's commercial interests into government business, right? That's not what the government wants to see happen. So the way that the NIAC works, the National Infrastructure Advisory Council works, is that it proposes initially working areas that we think the individuals can make progress on in recommending to the president what policy changes or what incentives or what programs should be put in place to deal with the problems that the president wants us to deal with and make recommendations on. So we've just gone through a process that the newest formation of this group just got convened, and they all had a work item to go off and propose work areas that we suggest that the president consider for us. And they're about to get back to us with our subcommittee assignments and kind of the readout on what the administration thinks are the most pressing things that we proposed. And then we'll go off and through, working with the staff at NIAC and our own company staff and our connections in the industry, create a report, a recommendation on our work area, backed by fact and backed by experts that we can bring into the mix from our own networks that can enable us to make good recommendations on policy. And it's all public record. It's all public domain and publicly accessible, because it has to be, because it's private industry advising the government. So that's how it works. And the problem is the problems are way bigger than I think most people would think at first blush. This crowd, maybe not. We've not only got, so we've got problems that stem from basically two areas. One, through either climate change or natural disasters that would have otherwise happened. We have to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient. So we don't want power to be down for a long period of time, water to be impacted, any other, our road system or bridge system, et cetera. We don't want any of that to be impacted for a long period of time if we have a natural disaster or an unnatural disaster or whatever causes an outage. So there's the protection, there's the resilience against that and recommendations that we can make. to deal with that problem. The second problem is there are a lot of bad guys out there. And as I'm learning new terminology every day in this role, the government refers to the, maybe it's just a cyber term that I'm not aware of, but they seem to, they refer to things in funny ways. They say the attack surface for cyber, as we bring digital energy resources from more places, think virtual power plants, think storage at businesses and homes, think very complicated solar management systems in businesses and homes, et cetera. As we bring those online, well, the bad guys have more access to mess with us and more way in, right? Because these things all have to be coordinated and managed. So they're all connected to some degree. And the minute you connect them, life has more imagination than we do, and bad guys have a lot of imagination. And so securing all that or containing and detecting a breach is really, really critically important. And then where you source that information, there are certain, countries that, have some veiled state-sponsored activities, et cetera, that we have to be very, very careful of. And so those are the kinds of things that we're working on. And I think it's a real issue. I mean, in keeping with the theme, things that could slow us down, you could create a lot of panic. You can create an awful lot of panic in the energy transition if the energy transition winds up getting hacked a lot or a few times. You only need to turn the power off for some period of time in a city to cause some real social concern over these sorts of things, and destabilizing us is something that a lot of the bad people out there are looking to do.
Oh, cool. Well, good luck on that. I hope you can make a real contribution there. The full disclosure, I led the BMW investment in ChargePoint. What is it now? 12 years ago or something. And ChargePoint was still a small company back then.
Yeah.
And we were happy to get a few chargers installed in front of the target and declare victory. It was a different game. Knowing I was going to do this, over the last couple of days, I clipped a couple headings from articles because this stuff is front of the news. Why America doesn't have enough EV charging stations. Meet the Biden official overseeing $7.5 billion for EVs. Electric truck stops will need as much power as a small town. Integrating electric vehicle charging into urban infrastructure. States test an electrifying idea. Roads that can recharge your EV. This stuff is top dead center for everybody. Tell us how you got into ChargePoint and why.
It's a lot. By the way, I love that. This is the hallmark of a new industry, and I love new industries. It's why I've never done the same industry twice, and I've had 4 jobs. So you think I'm crazy. I live in Silicon Valley. I've had 4 jobs. I've never taken a break, and I'm 57. So you can divide. Love new industries that are really early, way before there's formation. I like it when it's just a ball of spinning dust before there's been any accretion into a planet or a star or what have you, because you can affect it and you can shape it. But the problem is you got to be there for a long time. So what got me interested in EV charging, and it's nice to see the echoes of a new industry coming through and how much noise there is in those headlines. I read that as noise, by the way. What I tell the folks at ChargePoint is just turn your Google alerts off, ignore it, and keep your head down, because half of that stuff's bullshit. So the interesting thing is I punched the calculator after an interview with Mark Leshley, who was on the board when you were on the board, Mark. I told myself that, when I became a CEO, I would only do math with the calculator in this direction. When I was an engineer, I did math with the calculator in this direction because it's got more fancy functions. But, when you're a CEO, you get kind of lobotomized. So you have to be able to do stuff just with add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So if you take the number of cars on US roads, I'm going to spare you the screen, about 280 million. This is just in the United States. It's about an equivalent number in Europe. Take 280 million cars and you say, well, okay, there's 2 billion parking spaces to serve those 280 million cars outside of homes. And to some degree, you have electricity that's pervasive. We look at a map of the Earth from space at night, you see lights everywhere. So there's electricity generally everywhere. May not be the right, you may not have the distribution capacity, but you've got it generally in close reach everywhere. And so since you're parked 96% of the time, your car is 4% utilized, some percentage of those parking spaces, it doesn't have to be a big percentage, are going to get electrified. So you can top up charge, when you're parked around town, when you're at work, when you're, going to the grocery store, at a hotel, at public and private parking places. I just experienced this over the weekend. I was in Sacramento, parked at a couple of garages, used the ChargePoint charger. It was all easy. And you actually don't go to the gas station unless you're driving me on your battery rate. Then you look for a fast charger and basically top up really quickly to finish your trip. But you do that very infrequently. So since it's a top-up model, it's unattended, it's highly diffuse. It's a lot of zeros, and they all have to be managed and coordinated because you need access control, because you don't want any Tom, Dick, and Harry to plug in. You want to be able to control that. You want to basically, in some applications, deal with payment remittance, parking fees, energy management. There's so many things that you might want to have differential pricing depending on, or differential access rights depending on who the person is, or their rewards card holder or not, etc. So it's a giant.
When you were joining, so when you were thinking about joining ChargePoint and you wanted to affect that world,
Yeah,
right? You could have joined Tesla or an EV company and built the car side. You decided to go to the gas station side,
yeah,
the utility side,
yeah.
and there's the chicken and the egg. Which one's the driver to
Not so
actually
much. So
make this happen?
the reason that I didn't want to go to the car side is that there's a lot of OEMs out there, and eventually they all drive to what is essentially the same general product. Because an electric drivetrain is actually, I don't want to take anything away from the early guys in the industry. They really did a lot of groundbreaking things, but an electric drivetrain is fundamentally pretty simple. So it's going to commoditize on the electric drivetrain side, and there's a lot of them. And I don't necessarily, you go to a legacy car company and you're fighting change, right? Because change is hard at a legacy car company. You go to a new car company and you're fighting need for capital. That can kill you even with the best ideas. Or you can sell picks and shovels to gold miners. Not very sexy. No one wanted to get into it. And it takes a lot of infrastructure. There's a tremendous network effect. It takes a lot of work. It's not a CapEx intensive business. We don't own chargers and sell power. I would never own a charger and sell power. There's no money there. We can get into why anyone else would want to do it in a second. There's a lot of reasons, but that's not our business model. So if you look, we're not betting on any one tech or any one OEM. Any car sold with a plug drives demand for charging. And that's awesome. Because for us, it just puts utilization pressure out in the ecosystem and it causes demand for chargers, and we can go after that. And there frankly aren't that many companies going after it. There just aren't, that are well funded and that have all the wherewithal from the 15 years we've been in business. So you got to start early. It's a lot of zeros attached to it. There's a lot of chargers. It's a breathtaking size market. I'll give you one factor. We're a public company, so I can't tell you too much, but the midpoint of our annual guidance, we do have annual guidance out there for this year, is $475 million. That's the midpoint of our annual guidance. You're less than 2% penetrated in the install base in North America and Europe. Think about how big the company is on less than 2%. Imagine when it's 20%.
Right.
Imagine when it's 50%. And then imagine when you attach adjacencies, as we get bigger, as we attach adjacencies to this company, oh my God. It's you do the math on your calculator and you have to turn the thing sideways even when you're a CEO because you ran out of zeros and it goes into scientific notation.
So you turned to working on building the next Exxon or Shell. Did you bother to look back at the history of we went through a transition from buggies to cars, and somebody had to build the gas stations. And I know when I was trying to get BMW in the charge point, they said the car companies didn't build the gas stations. Why should we build the electron stations?
Well, first of all, it's not a gas. You're not going. You don't go somewhere to go somewhere when you drive an EV. So you're not going. So the first realization that you have to make is replicating the gas station model is dumb. The only time you need something that looks like a gas station in the EV world, and it doesn't look like a gas station in the EV world, is a dwell. We'll talk about that in a second, maybe, if he goes there. But the issue is that that's 5, 6, 7 times a year that you're going to be driving beyond your battery range. Unless you have a, second home that you go to every week that's 400 miles away, which, who wants to drive 400 miles up and back every weekend? But some people do. So maybe there's a few people out there, but that's in the minority. It's not that common to go beyond your battery range on a high frequency basis. So most of the time it's topping up where you naturally park. So that's the big difference with our market. But where gas stations started is the car shows up. It was a slow burn until the Model T. And you bought gasoline initially in glass bottles on pharmacy shelves until, it was like, how much of this stuff are we going to stick on a shelf? It's kind of flammable. And then it moved to, they'd have a tank out back and they'd run out with a 5-gallon, I'm not kidding, gas can, and they'd come out and, and then, the gas pump was born and it split off into its own industry. It took a while to evolve. But the chicken was the car. Well, actually, the egg was the car, and the chicken was the gas station, right? I got that backwards. And that's because it was demand, it was utilization that brought up the infrastructure, and that's the way EV charging is coming. So if I had $1 for every time I've had to take an Advil, every time I read an article that basically says we need to have enough chargers. Yeah, we got enough chargers for how many cars are out there. Maybe we're a little spotty here and there, but you can't. This transition is a 20 to 25, 30-year transition to get all electric. I'm sorry, I want it to go faster, but it can't, because we got 280 million cars on U.S. roads. Let's just take the U.S. You sell 15 million new ones a year. Just divide. It's 18.6. That's if 100% of cars sold tomorrow had a plug. It would take 18.6 years to turn over the fleet. It's just not going to happen fast. And it can. And if the Biden administration said, we're going to do a cash for your gas car program, kind of like cash for clunkers. And they said, and the consumers said, great, I'm going to run out with my big stimulus check from the government and I'm going to buy an EV. The automakers would be like, okay, now you want me to collect all us guys collectively to put in more manufacturing capacity than we currently have to spike up supply. By the way, that's assuming they could put it in quickly, to spike up supply only to have the transition happen and then to sit with a whole bunch of CapEx they can't use and a whole bunch of employees that are union employees that they can't fire. That ain't happening. So the capacity for vehicles is not going to go up magically to basically deal with what is a very late. Humans are, until a problem hits a human in the side of the head, we don't respond to it. So, okay, we got climate change issue. Too late. Okay.
You're arguing we have to go through a orderly, gradual replacement
go
process.
through it. Yeah, you can't. You got big money, big checks, big infrastructure, big everything associated with transportation. It don't change fast. And so we're going about as fast as we can. People just got to be now. Yeah, we got to get the unnecessary inefficiency out of the equation. But we're not going to just say, well, we have to do this out of conscience, so we're just going to flip a switch and electrify the whole planet. It's going to take 20 to 30 years to do it.
So we started out with the change doing small, cheap cars. That kind of didn't work very well. Then Tesla said, no, we'll do fast, high performance cars and start at the top and work our way down. Now, finally, they kind of got smart and said, the future is pickup trucks. And now you can get Ford pickup trucks, GM pickup trucks, Hummer pickup trucks, Rivian pickup trucks. Is that going to change the trajectory?
No. It won't, because it's still supply limited. So I know Jim Farley over at Ford. It's a great guy, CEO of Ford. I really respect him. He actually is a very good decision maker. He does good things. And he's coming up the curve as fast as he humanly can. I'm like, Jim, make more F-150s. And he's like, I'm making them as fast as I can. I mean, we're converting factories. We got, battery supply chain stuff that we're working on. Like, I can't flip a switch and just convert it all. And by the way, I also am running a business, and I got to worry about surviving this transition as we come up the efficiency curve. So you've got natural things that have to happen. The pickup truck is half the fleet vehicles in the United States. Half. If we could replay the tape and I could write the script, I would have started electrifying fleet vehicles before I started electrifying consumer vehicles, because it's a more concentrated and controllable way of making a transition coming up the curve. Also, it exposes consumers. Who's driving these things? Consumers are driving this for their job. So you're exposing consumers to it, and they're like, wow, and they'd probably be like, this is kind of nice. I have all these misconceptions about electric, but now that I drive one for work, the next car that I buy for my personal life, I might consider an electric one. So it might have been smart to start there. Why it didn't go there, and why you saw so much pressure on low-end vehicles, is because when government gets involved, and I'm not saying anything bad about the government, it's just natural, is that they look at accessibility and they want things. They would love things idealistically to start at the bottom. When you're bringing in new technology, you got to bring it at the high price points, because you need some elbow room on the gross margin side, or you just die. And you just die getting there. And so everything trickles down. Everything does. I've not seen any technology start not at the high end. I can't think of one. And so that's where this naturally goes. And the reason that you didn't start in fleet is they needed the credits, the fleet credits, if you remember, to be able to sell trucks and SUVs, right? So they needed the offset credits, right? They had to sell so many electric things to be able to sell their trucks and SUVs. And, at the time, they weren't thinking about that in the fleet domain. They were thinking about it more in the consumer domain. So I think, we could have started out a little smoother if we'd started in the fleet segment, but no bother. We could kind of worked itself out now.
So now we're seeing this, the proliferation, it's sort of won over in consumer electric vehicles. Where are we? Other than Norway, 85% of new car sales are electric.
New car sales, oddly, you're right about 50% of the install base, and they've been doing it for a long time. Yeah. And they only have, guess what? Norway, it's like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 million people.
That's all. It's tiny. So if now we're going to have the electric semi trucks all over the place, and electric delivery vehicles, and the postal vehicles finally, hallelujah, going electric, and micromobility is, electric bikes or electric delivery vehicle, electric scooters everywhere. Is the grid able to handle this in capacity, and does it handle it in diversity across all these different platforms?
Well, what I like to say is the grid needs an upgrade independent of electric vehicles. We have what I call smoke alarm level monitoring of a lot of our infrastructure, which is, oops, a transformer blew up. Really, it's 2022, and we don't have deep digital monitoring pervasively on our grid. Some utilities are better than others, and some geographies have more penetration than others. But we've got a woefully outdated grid, woefully. So I think what we need to do is solve that problem. Now, with that said, I don't think we have substantively a speed. The utilities can respond to different distribution needs. We don't have a generation issue for a long time. So the utility can respond to different distribution needs, more distribution capacity in certain locations, because it is a slow moving variable, because this is a 20 to 30 year change out cycle. So while we need to be considering how we modernize our grid, because it's long in the tooth, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to impede electric vehicle rollouts. You get some you see an article here or there, right? It took 9 months to permit a transformer. Sure, it's construction.
Yeah,
that's no big deal. Most of our chargers don't take 9 months to go on the ground when our customers buy them. And yeah, we might hit some bottlenecks here and there. We might have some hot spots in certain geographies, but that'll all work itself out. That'll all work itself out. We need some good policy, because what you get is you get policymakers working across purposes with their environmental goals, because ratepayer advocacy groups don't like additional things in the rate base because it makes rates go up, especially for people that are on the lower end of the income scale. So we've got to manage the policy, but putting in adjusting our distribution infrastructure at the rate we're changing isn't so bad. I'll give you a couple of numbers because you're all numbers people like I am. 4,000 terawatt hours in the US. That's about what we consume a year. If you electrified every drive mile, assuming fairly conservative efficiency that we're already exceeding, it's about 1.2 more terawatt hours. And with efficiency gains, it's probably going to be less than 1. Okay, in drivetrains of full electrification. So it's about a 25% additional load problem. But here's the good news. The grid is wildly it's engineered for peak. And so with some management, electric vehicles can charge in the valleys of the load curve because they're opportunistically charging. The fast charge when you're going beyond your battery range, no one should impede that. That should happen as fast as humanly possible. Put a bolt of lightning in the car. Who cares? It doesn't amount to anything. It's not that much relative to the amount of kilowatt hours that are going to go in the vehicle. That's 10%, maybe 15 at worst of the fuel is going to go in that way. The rest is going to come in at with managed chargers at fairly low rates that are easy for the utility to swallow. So it actually helps. It actually just reduces the peaks and valleys when it's managed. So really, they're helping more than hurting from a grid perspective. And you don't need wild amounts of V2G or virtual power plants or any of that stuff to make this work. While those things don't hurt in certain applications, they're also quite overblown. It's another one I tell my employees, please put your Google away, put your phone away really on that stuff. Managing the charge rate has a much bigger impact with much less complexity than V2G. V2G, sure, we have to participate in that. Does it make sense in some scenarios? Absolutely. Does it make sense in all scenarios? Absolutely not.
So years ago when I was on the board with you, I remember one of our favorite CEOs, had, let's say, a little friction with the utilities. At the time, and maybe you still see it today, there's a lot of attitude that government builds our roads, government should build out the charging network, and let's just get ahead of this instead of waiting for this to get private companies to pencil this out and finally decide they can invest and that a charger in a particular location is going to pay back quickly enough. Why don't we go ahead? I mean, I know you're running one of those companies that wants to defend its turf. Talk to me about why this is the right way to do it.
So I'm not necessarily defending my turf, so to speak, because they got to buy the tech from somewhere. So they could, the number of chargers required to service the world of electric vehicles in a particular geography is going to be the same, whether it's utility owned and operated or not. The problem is when you utility own and operate the damn thing, I don't mean to be disparaging for anyone who works at a utility, but their mindset is not a consumer mindset. And it shouldn't be. It's not a consumer product mindset. So they don't think about, nor will the regulators let them think about how they integrate with the business systems that are, near the chargers. So if it's a retail parking lot, integrating with rewards programs and advertising systems and things like that, and the valet parker and all that stuff. That's all. That creates vibrancy and richness and embrace and it also is good for consumers because you might not even pay for your fuel. I don't pay for most of my charging sessions because workplaces give it away. Most parking. I was just at San Francisco Airport. It's included in the parking fee. I didn't pay for my charging. I didn't pay for the electrons when I went to pick my wife up, and I was waiting Sunday night. There, I was plugging in, and so there's a lot of places where the business model in combination with the business that's on the site is much richer, much more vibrant. And then companies like ours want to invest in good mobile apps, et cetera. A utility just isn't, a regulated one is just not capable of, they have no latitude because they're regulated. They have absolutely no latitude. So you would get a rusted pile of junk in a parking lot that was a vending machine for electrons with the user interface of a parking meter. Is that what you want this to be? No.
Is the current system doing a good enough job on apartments, multi-unit dwellings? I mean, half the people don't own their houses and less have garages. They gotta find a way to charge in the wild, right?
35% are in multifamily in the US, in multifamily housing. Maybe it's 50% that don't own it because some people rent a house. I don't know that statistic.
Right.
But the way we worked it out with utilities, and actually almost all of them are our friends now because they actually see it, is the utility should, we successfully changed what's referred to as the line extension rules, where the make ready, all the construction and the upgrading of the electrical service in the site and the wiring up to the point of the charger can be done by the utility and put in a rate base. I'll spare you how utilities are compensated, but let it suffice to say that that's something that they naturally can do. And remember, that is, some of that construction is beyond the meter, and they normally aren't allowed to do anything beyond the meter. But in this case, the regulators are saying, yeah, that's kind of part of line extension. We're going to make an exemption for this. You can do the work, beyond the meter for the panels and the conduit and the wires and the concrete work and all the other stuff. So then if you do that at an apartment, if you have a utility program in an area and you can get the regulators to approve that, which we have in many states, in many jurisdictions, and we come in on the back of that with a charging as a service model for apartments. So we keep the charger CapEx on our balance sheet and charge the driver a monthly fee, right? And that's the one place we do operate as a service, but we're not selling power. The landlord, because we're hooked up to the common area power meter, the same meter the lights in the parking yard are hooked up to. Mm-hmm. We count the electrons going to, say, your car mark versus Doug's versus someone else's, and we bill you on the price that the landlord sets. The landlord's not trying to make money on power. They just want to cover their costs. So they maybe go slightly above their electricity rates just to make sure they cover their transaction costs and things like that. And so we bill you like $19.95 a month as a driver, and the plus power, the landlord controls the price of power. We reimburse the landlord pays their electricity bill. Everyone's happy. And if the landlord has a utility program, we arrange it all with the utility. The electrical upgrades get made on the site. We deal with the rest of it. So the landlord's happy. They don't really have to outlay much of anything. And drivers are happy. And lo and behold, you're off to the races. Now, this is not fully cemented out there in the universe because it's early, but it will go somewhere in that direction. Same thing with street side. Street side parking is going to go in a very similar direction, right? And I think it'll be tied into the permit parking program. So you'll pay for an additional fee for how many days a week, overnights, you want access to a charging enabled parking spot in your neighborhood. So in my town, they color code the zones here. So there's like the blue zone, the olive zone, or whatever. And if you're permitted, you get to park in that color coded zone. Imagine if there were charging stations in some of those, along the street, in some of those locations. And when you went and renewed your parking permit for the town, you said, I want 3 nights a week. I want Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I want to be able to charge. And they say, great, that's, however many extra dollars on your permit fee. And then you use our mobile app and, it tells you which space is available and you go to it. It's in your zone. So it's close to where your house is. And lo and behold, you're not driving around the block. It's actually super convenient because on those nights, you even know where you're going to park. So this is all solvable, 100% solvable.
Are the, cities have street lights, all kinds of furniture on the street, and yet then you see charging systems that are put in, but they're not hooked to the street lights and stuff. Are there Are
No,
these
power
public-private partnerships?
Yeah, we looked at that. Okay, the MIT crowd is going to love this. I couldn't do this at Harvard because they'd be like, "What are you talking about?" So the magic of I don't know what, the magic of whatever the transformers that drive the streetlights are slightly different voltage.
Yeah.
They're not a 240. They're like a 270. Really? I have no idea who thought of that, but they're not a. So now you need step down transformer. Okay. And so now you need that. And because an AC charger, which is what you would use for overnight parking, it doesn't have any power conversion electronics. It's just basically connecting you straight through and metering and dealing with the safety monitoring, isolation monitoring, and things like that around that AC connection. So streetlights also, when they were, sodium vapor lamps or whatever the technology was before LED, they had 400-500 watts that's the provisioning, right? So the wire gauge isn't big enough. I mean, they're daisy chains. So maybe you could put one charger in every, I don't know how many street lamps, even for triple charging overnight. So the street lamp idea, it's cute. I look at people coming after that and I'm like, wow, that's cute. Not practical. So now you got to go after, now you're putting in brand new street side infrastructure. And by the way, your point on cities and towns is they're increasingly divesting their ownership of all of their accoutrements in the city, parking meters, any infrastructure. They're outsourcing it and want someone else to handle it in general, not exclusively, but in general, it's a real trend. So your companies like us are trying to work with project finance sources that want to put together SPVs to own groups of assets that have an IRR, and it's great for things like pension fund investors and things like that want to set your watch by a return. The return's not that high, but it's plenty high for their hurdle rate, and you can get financing for those sorts of things. So those are very easy, I think, long-term problems to solve. And the more cars you get on the road, the less utilization risk there is of any of this stuff. So it becomes more predictable and you have more financing options.
So you and I had a fun conversation the other day about the potential impact. I've been an investor in, a believer in, a supporter of autonomous cars and the development of the AI to eventually get there. And yeah, it's a harder problem than people thought. But, we're starting to see a lot of vehicles running around certain cities and certain areas at certain times. It's not pervasive yet. But roll forward to where that works. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Ubers and Lyfts are going electric. Eventually, they'll be going autonomous. You've got a view of how does that really change things in a bigger way?
Yeah, so I've actually written some pieces on this. I actually am really excited about this. And I think we got a long way to go on autonomy. Actually, by the way, my thesis on that is the driving of the car is not the hardest problem. The hardest problem is the understanding of the behavioral model of everything that could intermittently get in your way. Like all of us here learn how to drive a car relatively quickly, not only because we're exposed to it from the time we're children, even when we're not piloting it, but we all learn what a squirrel will likely do versus someone looking down at their phone that's walking into a crosswalk versus a person that looks like they may be physically impaired to some degree. We have a model, a behavior model of how they're likely to behave and what their cues are, right? And so now you got to teach a car not only to drive, you got to teach a car to basically understand the difference between how a 5-year-old behaves that's throwing a temper tantrum with mom or dad, and how an able-bodied person that's distracted looking at their phone behaves when they're in an intersection. It's hard, right? That's the harder problem, is the behavioral models of all those things. So, but let's say we solve that, because we'll solve it. We're smart. Humans are awesome. We'll eventually get it there. The compute will come into line. We'll eventually solve it. That arc is evolving at roughly plus or minus a similar time frame to the arc of electrification and the arc of going to 100% renewable sources, which headline, in our opinion, energy goes to a capacity charge, not a metered charge for kilowatt hours, much like internet access. So I have a gigabit internet access in my house where I am right now. If I go on vacation, I still pay for a gigabit. I didn't use a gigabit, right? I still pay for it. I pay for the capacity because the CapEx is what's the problem. So let's say it all moves to renewables. It all moves to a capacity charge. We don't have time varying rates anymore. Time varying rates go the way of long distance fees. Who remembers those on landlines and stuff like that? We don't think about that anymore. So now what we get back isn't just a cleaner planet. That's actually negligible. It's not negligible, but it's one thing that we talk about that, and we're missing something. We get a lower cost of living and we get time back. That's the amazing thing, is try to do anything without transportation or energy. And by the way, the commodities that we all consume every day, food, other stuff, those commodities are largely driven by the cost to get them to you, not the cost to grow them, watch a plant make them in the ground. It's the pumps for the water, the logistics of getting it to you, et cetera. And when transportation gets cheap and energy gets cheap, lo and behold, the cost of living comes down. And when you add autonomy, everyone's radius gets bigger and they're not sensitive to time and transport. So the minute your radius gets bigger, you don't have to put the radius. If you look at the annulus you add around a city, when you make the radius just a little bit bigger, you get a lot more real estate. Unless you have a natural barrier like a mountain range or water on one side, you actually increase the radius substantially. So you're not sensitive to time and transport if you're not driving it. And I think what happens to autonomous vehicles is they don't look like cars. I actually think it's kind of funny that we're electrifying, we're autonomizing these things that look like 4 people are going to sit facing out the window and there's a steering wheel. Well, that's not what it's going to, when it's full autonomy and it's trusted, it's going to have more in common with an airstream, kind of like a lozenge that shows up a pod that's purpose built for you relaxing and working or doing whatever the hell you're going to do. So now you're suddenly not sensitive to driving an hour and a half for dinner. You're not, because you're partying on the way there. You ordered the damn thing with a cheese plate and your favorite bottle of wine. You share it with another set of friends and, you head out to dinner. You're just not that sensitive to time and transport. So you're going to get time back. You're going to get money back. And oh, by the way, we're going to clean up this pesky problem called climate change, although it's going to take a long time for the natural system to kind of reach back an equilibrium. At least we're going to put it on the right trajectory.
And if the skateboard is commoditized and the body pod that's put on top of them is highly customized, what's the role of an auto company?
Well, I don't know. It's why I'm not with an auto company. So the problem, this is an interesting one too. If you look back in history, history usually is a pretty good predictor if you've got a true analogy. History says that if you have a single commodity that dominates the bill of materials on a product, the business eventually goes to the maker of that commodity, not the packager. The packager dies.
So that's the battery.
That's the problem. So if you look at solid state disks, guess who's making them all now? Samsung. Why? They make multiple flash. Who made them initially? Now the disk drive people packaged up a bunch of Samsung flash chips until the market got big enough and Samsung said, thank you. I'll take that. I'll margin stack that up and keep that for me. There's more value out there. I'm doing all the work anyway. Well, TVs went that way. When there were glass tubes, RCA, Sony, right? Why? They knew how to make glass tubes. It was hard. It was a manufacturing process. They went plasma, Panasonic. They went flat screen, LCD, OLED, whatever. Sony came back with OLED. Sony got creamed initially when, in some of those transitions, because, they had the XBR, curved in one dimension tubes. When it went flat screen, they put their name on glass they didn't make and got killed. So the problem is it always goes to the commodity vendor. Well, guess what the commodity is in an electric car? The battery. The highest BOM cost in the whole damn thing. It dominates the BOM cost. So now if you're a battery manufacturer, Do you want to be a coach builder? Probably not. But in the old days of the horse and buggy, it was delaminated. There were coach builders, even in the early days of the car industry. There were coach builders and there were drivetrain makers. They didn't mix initially, they mixed later. So all what you could see is what my head of product likes to call t-shirt sizing for roller skates, because the roller skate's a flat plate. So its shape doesn't have to be influenced. It doesn't have to be influenced or adjusted for the industrial design of what's being snapped onto it, because it's a flat little plate. So now what you do is you make small, medium, large, and extra large, kind of like t-shirts. And, you know, the width of a lane kind of constrains you this way. And so you have slightly different varying wheelbases. And when you get to the small and medium, maybe you pull in the width a little bit because, you know, the aspect ratio would be kind of weird. And that's what you got. And then you got a whole bunch of people snapping coaches on it. But that lends itself really well to autonomy. It lends itself really well to a lot of things. So you could see the auto industry delaminate over the long term into something like that very quickly. And remember, the electronics, you know,
And either the battery guys.
docking station for this is where it's going. Someone, I didn't come up with this phrase, but someone in the industry a long time in the auto industry said, if we're not careful, we're going to be a docking station for an iPhone.
Yeah.
That's true. If they're not careful, they're going to be a docking station for an iPhone. So when the infotainment system is largely this, right? And the drivetrain is completely commoditized and t-shirt sized, there's not a lot left, right? Now, this is heresy right now, right? Because the auto industry looks the way it does, but life has more imagination than we do. Things change.
Some people, so you're arguing that the batteries own the world. Others would argue that at that point, it's an entertainment platform and it's the media and the entertainment and the advertising that owns it and pays for it.
Okay, so I get into this debate all the time with people, and I'm like, okay, this is always with me. My car, I'm in 4% of the time. So what's driving the bus? I'm a cord cutter, like most of you are probably at home. My environment, I could watch Netflix on this screen, I could watch it here, I could watch it on my iPad, I can pick it up in my car, but the app environment that I want to use is the app environment that I'm used to. I do not think auto companies are going to suddenly, you know, start making miniseries. Maybe. I mean, there could be some weird mergers out there, but I just don't see the DNA as being a good match.
Let's go back to charging for a minute. The
Tesla. So this is more fun than charging.
It is. The Tesla truck just came out. The Semi is out, the first few, right? And they have, if I understand it, a megawatt charger or some such thing. Talk about what that means to the grid and to the fleets and to charging networks.
So first of all, most trucks that are on the road are not Class 8s, although there are a lot of Class 8s. That's not most trucking. And I don't understand what all the hoopla is about hydrogen. And God, don't get me started on hydrogen. But
oh no, we're going to talk about hydrogen.
Yeah, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But you know, I'm sorry if anyone out there's in hydrogen, but I don't get it. So it's fairly easy to electrify a truck. You just have to purpose build it. And so a lot of the struggles are, a lot of the trucking manufacturers started out with their electric trucks being modifications of a diesel truck. And that's challenging because the compartments aren't organized for the optimum shape and placement of a battery in a truck. But if you purpose build the truck to be electric, then you're left with one remaining problem. They're heavier and weight is everything, because there's, you know, you want full payload in the trailer, full weight payload. You don't want any encumbrance. Right now, there's a lot of waivers going out for, in some states for Class 8s that are electric that are going to be a little overweight, but that'll get solved. You know, the gravimetric density problem will continue to improve with battery packs, and we'll get it in the right direction. The megawatt part of it is not the hard part. We have our power cabinets come in 200 kilowatt increments with 40 kilowatt, power conversion modules inside each one of them. So you bolt 5 of their outputs together and you got a megawatt. That's not the problem. The problem is, with most trucking, you can solve it with endpoint charging, meaning at the distribution centers or where they're parked, because they don't go very far, 250 miles, 200 miles, whatever. That's easy to solve with endpoint only charging. When you need it on route, there is not a lot of distribution along main highways. There's transmission. So if you're driving down a highway and you look up to your left or right, you normally see a transmission tower. You quite often do. You don't see a distribution substation. You might see a transmission substation at an intersection point of major transmission circuits, but you don't see much distribution. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to build out some distribution coincident with, highway, good locations for Class 8s to refuel on route. The actual refueling of the Class 8 is not the problem. It's actually getting access. You got to build whole cloth distributions in many locations to get enough energy. Not at all, but in many. And so that's going to be one interesting thing that we have to solve. That's completely solvable. It's purely policy.
And charging stations, charging stations of all kinds can't really be profitable just selling electricity, right? They got to do something else.
Well, yeah, look, the way that to stay on the Class 8 case, you'll probably be you're volumetrically selling a lot of electrons, and so it'll probably be part of a trucking company's fuel contract, and those that will be profitable, or it'll be adjacent to the truck stop business where they're selling the driver other services, and in which case you could see some cross subsidy like you do now with liquid fuel. But I think you'll get such high utilization, such predictable utilization on those chargers, and you can use software to schedule it and a whole bunch of stuff. You probably in those cases can make modest rate of return that'll satisfy a lot of the project finance requirements, for long haul trucking. That's not the big use case for charging. That's not the big use case.
So I see some articles, and I think the IRA supported what they call electric roads, burying some power, and you drive down the road and inductively or however pick up those electrons that way. Is your company looking at the newfangled approaches to charging?
Well, we looked at that. Well, we look at wireless in general, but that application of wireless in particular makes us scratch our heads, because the laws of physics work the same for everybody. And RF coupling of energy across an air gap, okay, you need pretty good alignment, or else it gets really inefficient. So, you're gonna have to maintain pretty good alignment. Now with lane keeping systems and autonomy, you could actually potentially hold reasonable alignment. I don't think you're gonna hold it perfectly, but you'll hold reasonable alignment. The bigger issue is, what are you trying to solve? The recharge time is not the issue. The driver's got to take a break anyway every 4.5 hours or whatever. Most delivery vans don't go very far, so their entire day's routes fit in the battery. So they have long dwell. They're not super high utilization vehicles. You got at least dwell for 8-12 hours, so you can recharge them just fine. So all the return to base stuff doesn't apply. For the long haul truck, you got plenty of miles to fit in a battery. You can, and the driver's got to take a break anyway. You just plug the damn thing in, and roads buckle, right, due to weather. Now think about, maintaining continuity with an inductive stripe in the road, the alignment issues, et cetera. And then you got to carry the power conversion around on the truck, because, it comes off, the energy comes off probably at 300 kilohertz, 400 kilohertz is probably pretty optimal across the air gap. And then you got to convert it back to DC at the voltage and current that the battery wants, that is current SOC. So you've got a lot of electronics on the vehicle. It's just literally crazy. I look at it, I hope I'm not insulting anyone, but I'm like, please don't work on that problem. That's just nuts.
So So if inductive while driving down the road doesn't work for you, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
I've never made sense of it. What about inductive charging in your parking lot, parking garage, et cetera?
So here's the problem with inductive charging. First of all, I don't see anyone not buying an electric vehicle. So like, goddamn, I don't like plugging this thing in. Then you've got all kinds of alignment issues, all kinds of surface debris issues that you have to maintain, weather, etc. And then there's no standard, right? There's no standard for that. So here's the niche where it has some application. And by the way, you've got to carry the same power conversion electronics on the vehicle. So you're going to limit the speed to the power electronics, weight and size that you want to carry around on the vehicle. But let's say you're an autonomous vehicle that's high utilization that returns to base. And it always charges at base. The proprietariness of the solution doesn't matter at that point. So for an autonomous vehicle that's returning to base, assuming that it can carry around the power electronics on the vehicle and that fits into the cost equation for, and the utilization equation for that vehicle, and it may make sense there. I'd still be more in favor of a contact-based system, an automated contact-based system, because if all you're trying to avoid is having to have an attendant to go plug it in, there are way more deterministic ways of getting energy into an autonomous vehicle, and autonomous vehicles can align with things pretty carefully. One of the problems with humans, you ever been in a parking lot where the Chevy Tahoe next to you parked over the line encroaches on your parking space? Well, let's say you're trying to align with a charging pad within 4 inches. That's what you got to align to within 4 inches for a wireless system. You got a Chevy Tahoe sitting to your left. You can't align with it. There's so many problems, even if there were a standard, and no one's asking for it. So I look at it and I'm like, could we do it? Yeah, it's not rocket science. We know exactly how to do it, right? But it's not something that we see enough coordination in the industry, enough consumer demand, and enough application to really drive as a major shift in charging. I think it's connector based for a very long time, if not forever.
So I'm gonna use we have about a half an hour to play with here, Pat. And I appreciate your time, but I'm gonna use some of the questions that we have a lot of audience activity. You are getting people fired up. But I have to, people will kill me if I don't at some point ask you about their experience of finding chargers that are broken or don't work or not available or they can't connect to, or they can't figure out how to get their account to work with. Just a blizzard of those kinds of issues. I'm sure you've dealt with them a lot. How much are they a part of your life? What's the issue here?
Well, I mean, so I'll tell you what we're doing so you've got early market undulation issues that are going to cause that noise level to be there, and we're cleaning it up as fast as we humanly can. I don't think our network's actually pretty reliable, but we're running a business and we're changing our business practices to get our site owners, businesses that have chargers on their sites, to kind of do things the right way. So we sell maintenance and support packages. So if we sell a maintenance and support package, it's on us to fix the thing, and our proactive diagnostics will usually tell us if something's wrong with the electronics. If something's wrong physically, like someone backed into the charger, we can't tell, or they broke a piece of plastic on the thing or something. And so we rely on being told through the magic of a mobile app. Our drivers the charge point drivers that are using stations will usually try to do that, and we're trying to put improvements in place where we can get better feedback more rapidly on stations that are in a compromised state on our network, so we can get out and get them fixed. We're trying to think through, and we've got some ideas we haven't announced on how, the carrot and stick approach to keep a station owner that has, that's bought stations that doesn't want to pay for maintenance and support, how we can encourage them the right way through business to keep them well maintained. And in general, in terms of usability and accounts, if you download the ChargePoint app, it doesn't cost anything, so I'm not causing you to spend any money. But if you download the ChargePoint mobile app, what you'll see is that it'll roam with just about every network out there. The only one I think we don't roam with, it's in the United States and Canada, is Electrify America, and that's only because they want to maintain it right now. They don't want to roam with anyone. We roam with them only on the basis of the Mercedes-Benz integration that we've done, but they haven't enabled broad-based roaming. But that's different. That's their business decision, not ours. We'll roam with anyone. So you can use your ChargePoint app to start a session on any network that we roam with, and we'll literally roam with everyone. We have 600,000 ports available, 400,000 roaming ports. So a little over, it's actually a little higher than 200,000 now on our network directly, and another 400,000 globally that we roam with. So there's a lot of chargers, 2/3 of the chargers, not from us, that you can activate and pay. You can find them on our app. It'll tell you the status because we're real-time connected to those networks, and we have to trust the data they give us. So if they say a charger's up, we believe it because we have no other way to prove it. But they give us real-time feeds up to the minute on the charger locations and status and price, etc. So it's through the magic of business model software, etc. This all gets cleaned up, and a lot of the early stuff that went in, not necessarily from us, but from just the world at large. A lot of were grants in cities and towns and things like that, but locations where things haven't been thought through. So you're going to run into some echoes from that early era, but it'll get cleaned up. So it's just part of that. You're under 2% penetrated into the install base. You may live in a town where you see a Tesla every other car, but you're 6% of new car sales in the United States are electric, 15 in California. So if you happen to live in California and you happen to live in certain towns in the Bay Area in California, you think everyone drives an electric car, but it's just not the case.
So you're saying, the popular belief is in order to get around, I need 5, 6, 7 different charging apps because I got to figure out whether the charger at Stanford is ChargePoint or somebody else's. You're saying all that roaming solved all that. It doesn't matter anymore.
Doesn't matter anymore. In fact, we wear the white hat here because we don't want to impede the internet. I mean this sincerely. The way we look at it is no one's going to change where they go because there's a charger or not, unless they really desperately need a charge and they're driving beyond their battery range. So I'm not going to get you to eat at a different restaurant. You're not going to do that. So I'm not going to try. What we need to be is high utility. Collectively as an industry in our mobile applications, we need to be high utility for drivers. We don't make any money on drivers. So for us, it's a labor of love to keep our customer's customer and our customer's employee, that's who a driver is, happy. And so we'll roam with anyone, and we don't make money on that roaming. We don't try to charge you $4 like an ATM does when you're using a third-party ATM. We don't do any of that. We're not trying to make money on those transactions or anything like that. And if the other networks that we roam with, you can use, if you like their mobile app better, you can use their mobile app to find, use, and pay on ChargePoint chargers, and everything just works. The only thing is that if there are private station features that are, that have to know who you are to validate you, then you have to use the ChargePoint app to be able to unlock those on the station, right? There are things like a workplace charger where they integrate it with their HRIS, and they want to make sure that only their employees are using those chargers.
No.
They don't roam because they can't, not because we do, but because if you just think about the problem for 10 minutes, it can't.
Okay.
But out in the wild, use any app you want.
Interesting. I know you said you kind of laughed it off, but there is a lot of interest in hydrogen, especially at the heavy end of things, trucks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Making green hydrogen is still stupid expensive, but talk about what you're seeing as that versus the evolution of the batteries.
Well, part of it is, if you look at the oil and gas industry, they thrive on a feedstock driven industry, right? Think about it. They move their logistics for a hydrocarbon. That's exactly what a oil and gas company is. Really good logistics for hydrocarbon. They don't like it when there's no logistics because there's nothing for them to do. The energy transition to electricity kills an oil company. And participating in charging, if they had the same drive miles on electricity and they made it all and distributed it all and sold it at the charging station, they would make a fraction they would have a fraction of the revenue, a lower gross margin than they would with oil. So they're screwed, right? They can't land their business into electricity because electricity, lo and behold, is a really great way to fuel your vehicle because it's really very cheap and electric vehicles are really efficient. So now, if you got this perfectly nice feedstock business where you pump and process and stick stuff on, containers and transport it around the planet, it'd really be nice to have, some ammonia-based transport system or something like that because you're moving stuff around. You're good at that. Sorry. There's no value in that, and there's no value in it for the following reason. I'll give you an analogy. Let's look at solar. In the beginnings of solar, everyone was like, we're more efficient with concentrated photovoltaics. We'll point mirrors at like a molten salt tank and all that stuff. And what happened is the Chinese just made polycrystalline so much cheaper. It was like, we'll just use solar panels. And that's what happened over time. Just you're catching a falling knife. You're just fighting this decline curve. If you use today's numbers, maybe hydrogen pencils for some things, but hydrogen doesn't pencil for most things. And if you look at the battery curves and where that's going, efficiencies, et cetera, there's not enough application out there. So there's, and people always go, well, how about big ships? And I'm like, aircraft carriers have been using nuclear for a long time. I'd use nuclear. For big cruise ships, for big container ships, transportation of really big stuff. I don't see why for generation we don't use more nuclear, but we've proven, you could fuel a boat for literally 20 years and not have to fuel it. I'm sure that'll pencil. So we should be looking at nuclear for marine. Marine's about 7% of oil consumption. Aviation's about 8%, call it in round numbers. Aviation's the one that's a problem. And so what I say to that one is get to that one last, because you'll be able to deal with short haul with electricity. You'll be able to deal with short haul boats with electricity. We're already electrifying ferries and personal watercraft and things like that. So if you just leave the large airliners and cargo planes on, a fuel source that's as green as humanly possible, but you leave it there, solve that problem, kick that can down the road and solve that later. I don't see why we are trying to solve that one right now. Maybe there's we can make incremental steps with hybrid aircraft. I think that would be, an interesting one where you have series hybrid electric, aircraft, things like that. That'll all work and help, and it'll move down the emissions curve. But I don't see developing a bunch of hydrogen infrastructure for a receding set of applications that won't justify all the infrastructure, because for cars, no, that's dead. For cars, the world has spoken, it's batteries. For everything, including Class 8s, it's batteries. Okay, so now you've cornered the damn problem that hydrogen can address to these two small markets. I say go nuclear on maritime. So now you're down to like a subset, a large subset, but a subset of the aviation industry. Okay. So
sorry, just to go back, when we were talking about all the interconnection between ChargePoint and others, all the interoperability of charging networks, we didn't touch on the connector. Is everybody going to just adopt the Tesla connector and move on?
no, I don't think anyone adopts a Tesla connector that's got a CCS connector on the car. There's no standards issue. Why would you adopt, if you're an auto manufacturer, why would you adopt Tesla's connector? That doesn't make sense.
I mean, is Tesla going to be part of the interoperable network?
Well, it's up to Tesla. They have a CCS adapter,
Yeah.
right? So you could go to a normal charger and use, if you buy they give you the AC adapter with the vehicle. So for the bulk of your charging, it's already not a non-issue. It's an absolute non-issue. We can hang Tesla cables now, finally, on our chargers, or we're, eventually, we're enabled to do that development. We can't do it overnight, but weren't able to do that. So we could potentially do that on the chargers and have a dual cable charger. So you have a Tesla cable and a CCS cable. But most of the world's already CCS. So I don't see why most auto vendors would go the other direction. That doesn't seem to make much sense. But that's what
You think Tesla will go?
Well, by the way, Tesla's CCS in Europe. They don't use the proprietary connector in Europe. They're already the standard connector in Europe. So it's only for North America. So I don't see why the rest of the auto industry would do that. No knock on Tesla. I mean, I think I respect everything that they're doing. It's just I just don't see the necessity for the auto industry to basically take that.
So a lot of the IRA money is going into battery supply chain stuff. Some of it at the far end, the recycling end of it, but a lot of it going into helping stand up gigafactory after gigafactory. Have you looked at whether we have enough materials going into that? And is that one of the gating items here?
The biggest thing, like the title of this talk, is what could go wrong? Mining permits. That's what could go wrong. The problem is we're going through an ideological realignment of globalization. That's what I mean. It sounds horrible, but that's what is unfortunately unfolding out there.
The world isn't flat anymore.
No, it's like the world is basically declaring who's a bad guy and who's a good guy, and it's declaring that you can't buy from bad guys. And so, and it's our own definition of what that. I don't want to offend anyone, and it's like that's a hot topic, but the way it practically renders is that we are splitting into a universe of countries that are ideologically aligned and that we feel safe doing commerce with. And globalization will exist within that domain and within the other domain, the people that are ideologically aligned along a different set of lines. So we have traditionally said, well, when it was one big globe and we kind of looked the other way on ideological misalignment, we basically were like, well, great, we'll just buy the stuff from them. But unfortunately, now we're like, well, governments are saying you can't buy from them anymore, and you can't make stuff over there anymore, or it's going to be really hard on you. So, and there's going to be tariffs, and there's going to be, security requirements and Buy American requirements and all this sort of stuff. So we've got in the universe of trading partners that we have, we've got to accelerate the development of lithium, manganese, copper. Cobalt's not such a big deal anymore because we don't use much of it in batteries anymore, and that's kind of going away. But we need a lot of lithium, and it's plentiful. Third on the periodic table, right?
But yeah, a lot.
Yeah, because it's
just
helium,
very dispersed.
right? So it's everywhere. Things that are in low atomic number are early in the fusion cycle for a star. So they're the most plentiful because fusion stops in iron and the massive the sun. That's where the forces you can't go any further than iron. All the stuff above iron gets made through some other process with neutron stars or other things. So the shit that's plentiful on the periodic table, it's all over the Earth's crust. It's in there. We just got to dig it up, and it's usually aligned with lake beds, whether they're dry or not, et cetera. So it's a relatively easy thing to acquire intellectually. The problem is we're just not used to basically enabling new mining operations in the Western world. We're just not, and we need to just get used to it. We need it. We absolutely need it. That's going to be the one big rate limiter. If anything kills us, it'll be that rate limiter that'll slow us down. And we just got to get over it, because I don't know how you do it any other way. You just got to get over it.
And those mining permits are state or federal or all of the above?
I'm not absolutely certain how the morass works for for permits like that, but I would imagine that there's probably on federal lands, I guarantee you it's a federal process, much like oil drilling on federal lands, and on state lands, I'm sure the states have something to say about it. I'm sure the feds can't say you can put a mine there, and the states will say, oh, sure, right? And so that's my supposition, just based on how things generally work in the country. So yeah, there's a lot of politics involved. There's a lot of politics, and you know what's interesting is, and I don't mean this in a negative way towards a lot of the environmental groups that are out there, but a lot of environmental groups work at cross purposes to the environment, because they'll be like, no mines, and we'll be like, okay, but we need to electrify transportation and shift to renewables, because if we don't, you get a huge environmental impact. So you have to look at the if you don't, what environmental impact did you instigate by not? And that's kind of lost in the equation, right? And so, you know, it's really great to say no to something that may have some local unknown environmental impact. I love the environment. I mean, in my personal life, I try not to, you know, burn any fossil fuels in any way, but you know, we got to make trade-offs, and we are going to have to figure out how, in the most careful way, we're going to have to figure out how to get the resources we need, or it's not going to work.
So we need mine-friendly environmental groups.
I think what we need is we need to figure out how to move the parentheses around, so we evaluate the environmental impact of a decision more broadly. So we say, well, if you don't do that, then what impact, how, if you slow down the energy transition, how much more environmental damage current course and speed, we're doing environmental damage. If you can accelerate the transition, if you can, you know, detract from current course and speed in a positive way, so we're not doing as much damage, then you're helping. So if you look at, you know, approving a mine, which may say disturb a habitat for, you know, something, right? Which, sure, should we be mindful of that? Of course. But what's the greater harm? Because we got a lot of biodiversity problems with, you know, the planet warming up. So, you know, okay, maybe we have an impact in this one local area. How does that weigh against the fact that as climate change happens and we have drought in areas we didn't have drought, we have catastrophic weather events, or we have a change in what can grow in places, and so things that certain animals like to eat don't grow there anymore. What did we do to those habitats? Well, we did a lot of bad things to those habitats. So you got to make the damn trade-off, and we're not. And then politics enters the play, and it's just a mess.
Well, I'm happy to say that, you know, MIT is spinning out Commonwealth fusion, and
go fusion, please.
A few more years, right? Fusion will be the solution.
The last 50 years.
No, it's around the corner now.
I hope so.
Hey, just for fun, I know you just moved into a new house, which is, congratulations, not news, but you told me that you're going off the grid, all electric, everything electric. If you don't mind, tell everybody kind of how you do that and what are the pitfalls.
Well, okay, so in my last house, which was my first foray into like trying to live it, I figured out how to on a lot of things that were available as either grants or tax credits or whatever, convert when I remodeled, like all my, you know, the obvious stuff, like all my lighting went LED across the board. You can, you know, get credits for heat pumps. And there were a couple of things that I put in solar thermal for my pool heater, which is a pain in the butt. And so what I'm doing here is I'm upsizing the solar array that's going to go on the house, and they make, actually, when I put a pool in, I don't have one yet. They make heat pumps that'll heat or cool a pool with electricity. So what I'm trying to do is make my fuel as electricity, put in batteries, so I can go off grid, because I can use the batteries in conjunction with the solar to basically power the house overnight. And then I'm going to convert the boiler in this house. It's got radiant heat in the floors. So I'm going to try to convert the boiler to electric. There are electric boilers for radiant heat. It also makes the hot water for the house. So it'll solve the hot water problem. I'm going to change the cooktop to inductive. It's gas right now. I not burn gas when I cook. And so I'm going to try to just get it all down to as electric as possible and use the solar and battery around the house to kind of get myself off the grid. So we'll see. This will be the second round, so it'll be a little bit more optimal than the first one.
Excellent. With how many power walls and how many electric cars?
Well, I have 2 electric cars. I haven't been able to burn gas for 12 years. My wife and I have been driving electric for probably more than 12 years. And so we're right about there. And so we have a Polestar 2 and a Tesla Model Y and 2 ChargePoint home chargers that are managed. So they charge on a schedule. So I can adjust the charging schedule so they charge optimally relative to whenever the solar array gets put in and the battery. And then I'm putting in 5 Tesla power walls. So I got enough battery. They're not very big. They're only 13 kilowatt hours. I'm like,
You've owned lots of different electric cars over there. I remember you had some of the earliest ones, right?
Yeah, I had
what all of you had.
So before I joined ChargePoint, I wanted to basically not burn gas as much as possible. And the only one that I could have ordered at the time, I could have ordered a Tesla Roadster, but that was kind of small. And so I had a Fisker Karma for a while, even though I was debating on whether I should do that. I don't like the plug-in hybrid architecture that much.
Yep.
It was one of the first ones that was out there. I had a very early Model S when Tesla finally introduced the Model S. I leased it, so I had 2 of those and I'm on a Y. So that's my electric car history for me. And my wife's had 2 Mercedes B-Class electrics, and that had a Tesla drivetrain in it, believe it or not. And so those B-Classes were a compliance car for Mercedes-Benz.
That's
But
right.
they were really nice. They didn't have much range. They only had 110 miles of range, but between the 2 of us, we could manage that just fine with the 2 vehicles. And we learned that, hey, this is kind of nice and it's not very hard. And then she now has a Volvo Polestar. Well, Polestar's Volvo's another Volvo. She has a Polestar 2 right now, which has our app native in the car. The ChargePoint app is native in the car. It's actually a Google car, but not Android Auto Google. It's running the Google operating system in the vehicle, which is its entire infotainment system. So that's my transportation stable. I've forgotten whenever I have to rent a car and it's hard to get an electric car. Here's what happens. And I kid you not, this is so funny. My wife's car and my car do not have start buttons. So they don't have off buttons. You just get out. I leave the car running all the time. When I get out of a gas car, I'm just not used to turning a car off.
You just leave it running.
Yeah, so it's like I leave the damn car running, and literally sometimes I come back and I'm like, oh my god, I left the car running. The other thing is I turn creep off in both cars. So like when you come off the brake, it doesn't start rolling forward. So I forget that when I get in a gasoline car, if you take your foot off the brake, it might start rolling forward. And I've almost run into cars in front of me because you're not paying attention and you don't expect that to happen. So I've become literally unable to safely drive a gasoline car, I think, because I've deprogrammed myself.
That's great. Well, Pat, I just want to thank you for everyone who's been on here. You've been entertaining and informative and fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I love doing this.
Great. Thanks. Doug, wrap it up, man.
All right. Well, wow. You guys did what a tour de force, almost an hour and a half Q&A session, basically, which is pretty doggone good. And I applaud you both for that. Pat, thank you so much for doing this and really giving us a lot of insight into these different issues that I think a lot of people are very interested in involving electric vehicles. So again, thank you both for doing this. Mark, so much for the preparation I know you put into this, and so on. So it was really great, and thank you. Now I'd like to talk about our next event. Since hydrogen was such a big issue in the audience queues, I'm happy to tell you that our next event is going to be what we call Hydrogen 101, which is really going to talk about the basics of hydrogen. And we got two really experienced, capable people as speakers here. Brian Pivovar, who's with NREL, and he's deeply involved. That's what he's really focused on now at NREL to doing that. And then we have Steve O'Rourke, who's the, he's not managing director, he's the co-development officer for JERA Americas. And JERA, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a Japanese company, but they are totally focused on migrating the appropriate applications from whatever they are today to a hydrogen environment. One of the points I'll make about that, by the way, since it seemed to come up, is that we don't believe, I mean, you won't find in this thing a focus on hydrogen for most transportation applications. Some of the biggest ones, yeah, because of the high energy density of hydrogen, may make some sense. I personally, because I love nuclear, would love to see a nuclear alternative instead. But, you know, nuclear is nuclear, you know, it's got this problem of image, unfortunately. So we just don't really know. But time will tell, and that's one of the interesting things, is that we can see the future unfold as we go through all of this. So anyway, that is going to be on January 19th. There'll be our first event of 2023. And I do want to point out that it's a start time of 5:30. And this is the first time we've started at 5:30. We have been doing these at 5 start times, but we're finding out we don't get all of our audience at 5, and we think we'll do much better at 5:30, give you a little more time to get home and settled and everything. So please remember that. That's an important change, and this is going to be our standard start time from at least for 2023. That's it. Again, I want to thank both Mark and Pat so much for the work they've done on putting this together and the information they've given us. So everybody, have a wonderful holiday season out there. Be safe, and we hope to see you again in 2023.
Thank you.
Adios. Thanks a lot.